And on he goes, Grzycki, into the box. Peacock Farrell with a save, but it's in again! Jared Bowen, goal-scoring bonanza. And it's the Tigers who are toppling the table toppers.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the 2010s, our look back on the decade that was Hull City in the 2010s. And with me for this episode, I have Logan. How are you, Logan?
Yeah, good afternoon, Alex. Mate, I'm doing pretty well. It's good to see you again. And just looking at the notes for this episode, I'm rattled by how recently this was and how I seem to have better memories of things that were further into the past than this episode. But I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, that's right. Look, we'll do our best. This is certainly, looking back on the other episodes we've done for the 2010s, where we've had our Premier League seasons or our promotion seasons or even the relegation seasons, and you kind of go, they stand in the memory. Even the previous set of episodes with Slutsky's sacking and Adkins' arrival maybe stick in the memory more than this. On balance, did end up being quite a neutral season. As I jump to the next slide, I mean, it was our first season where we were in the championship, having been in the championship the previous season since I think 2010, 2011. So it was the first sort of stable season in that sense. And also we finished the season in the championship. So obviously the next season under McCann, we get relegated to League One. But this was a very uneventful season, which as far as City goes in the 2010s, there weren't a whole lot of those sorts of seasons. So it's one that you would be forgiven for not having strong memories of. I mean, the audio that we played there to start the episode was from the Leeds victory. I think it was towards the end of December where we won 2-0 with Bowen getting the double against them when they were top of the table at the time. That game certainly sticks in the memory, and there are a few games like that sort of stick in the memory. And of course, the players on screen here, we've got Bowen and Grzycki sort of tore the league up that season. But yeah, so general thoughts on that season, or general, I guess you say you don't have strong memories of that season. Is there anything that does stick in the mind about that season?
Yeah, I think the thing that does stand out to me was when you mentioned the Leeds victory, I'm almost certain we went 3 in a row, or perhaps it was 3 out of 4 games, and it was around the Christmas period, because I do remember how poor the start to the season was. And so, yeah, like you said, it was a largely, uneventful season. But again, like following City, there's always some sort of twist in the tail. And that period around Christmas really kind of shifted the mindset to go, well, hold on a second, we're actually a chance of sneaking a playoff berth, because I think one thing that we have kind of become accustomed to as I say championship fans for City is, although we might have good seasons, picking up consecutive victories has always been like a kind of interesting note. There will be like, we might go back to back and then have a draw, then a loss, then a win, but it doesn't always have this linear like progression of 5 or 6 wins in a row. And that's, one part of being in the championship. But I do remember that the form that Jared Bowen was ridiculous. And him and Grzycki together, I know that kind of that the image that you've put up to accompany the slide kind of says it all. But I do remember thinking to myself, on paper, as a squad, we aren't really that impressive and probably have no right to be, pushing for a playoff spot. But such was the combination between these two. They just looked, leaps and bounds above certainly our players on paper, but in the championship, they really stood out. And, it's no wonder kind of reflecting on this to see where Jared Bowen's moved on to, because he was really something special in, like being able to stand out in the championship that we know is like such a tough league in the way that he did.
22 goals for Bowen, 9 goals for Grzycki. I think Campbell also chipped, I'm just having a look at the stats here, chipped in with 12 goals, Irvine with 6. But outside of that, our next, we've got Evandro and Pugh and Kane all got 3 goals each. So there's a really sharp drop-off in terms of goal contributions from those players. And it's one of those things where it's an interesting one because it obviously was at a time when the Allams were pulling a lot of money out of the club. Was selling players like Andy Roberts and Harry Maguire for large fees, and then not seeing a whole lot of that reinvested in terms of transfer fees. Or maybe it was going towards the running of the club, and obviously the Allams were also taking a chunk of it out for themselves. But it's that time of being a City supporter where you reflect on it and think how fortunate, how much good fortune came about that Bowen was essentially plucked from the academy, and to score 22 goals in your second full season of senior football is just utterly ridiculous.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think the other thing that does stand out is how many assists Grzycki was responsible for. It kind of just felt like every time we would break wide, there was something coming because if it was either Jared Bowen passing to Grzycki or vice versa. And as you mentioned, I did forget Fraser Campbell chipped in as much as he did.
Yeah, I'd actually forgotten him too until I just looked up those stats. I was just going to have a look at what Grzycki's assist stats were for that season, because you're right. Like, it did feel like even though he only had the 9 goals, he certainly seemed to chip in with 12 assists is incredible. And as you say, it was just one of those combinations where it was such fun watching. We were talking just before the episode of what got us up in the middle of the night, so to speak, to watch City in those days when we weren't really showing ambition to get promoted. What got us sort of tuning in each week and supporting the team. And it was, I guess, knowing that as long as we had Bowen and Grzycki in that starting 11, we were very likely to score goals. We were likely to see them contribute to those goals. And we were always a chance to win matches while those guys were playing, because even though, as you say, the rest of the team was probably bottom half of the championship standard at best, they were arguably, even at that point, close to Premier League quality.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then I guess the other memory that does shoot out to me now as I kind of go through the notes as well was the 6-0 win against Bolton. It's very, very rare that that City have put a team away in that kind of fashion. But 6-0, I do remember that, and it was in January. It was right around that Christmas period, which was a very proud period for the club.
Yeah, and I guess in the next episode we'll probably reflect more on that transfer window, which still has to go down as one of the funnier transfer windows we've had, which we can laugh about in hindsight. But I just remember going into that window and Ehab sort of saying, Ehab kind of coming to this realization of, well, hang on, if we put just a little bit of money in, there's a chance we could get to the Premier League and I could get all this extra money from the Premier League. So maybe I should actually go for it. And he did that interview for the club where he sort of said, we're going to back the manager in and try and, make a challenge for the playoffs. And I think we went the whole window not bringing anyone in. And then on deadline day, we brought in Liam Ridgewell, and maybe we brought in, was it Pugh came in on loan as well? But basically going that whole window, sort of teasing these additions, and then to bring in, an arguably past his best, or I don't think there was much argument about it, but he certainly past his best centre-back from the MLS, didn't sort of strike me as, the height of ambitions, I would say.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Look, the other aspect, I guess, that was interesting, we were talking before the episode, finding ourselves at the moment in current day City supporting tenure with Tim Volter having a reasonably rough start to the season. A lot of discussion, including from myself and Dan and others on the podcast, about whether he's the right manager for us. It's interesting when you look at it in the context of this season, where we did start the season with only 2 wins in our first 14 games. And it could have been quite easy for the club to sack Nigel Adkins in that sort of run of form. And maybe the cynic in me says they just didn't want to have to pay any sort of, compensation figure to him. And that was the only reason he stuck around. But it's probably another one where you go, with the benefit of hindsight, it was actually a really strong decision made by the club.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And I think that the one thing that kind of stands out to me when I reflect on Nigel Atkinson's time in charge was just the absurd amount of positivity that the guy operated with. And sometimes you would listen to a post-match press conference with him, and he was so uninspiring in the way that, that it'd be like a really disappointing defeat. Yes. And he would just be like, oh, yeah, I thought that the players tried really hard. We'll get back to training. And I would just sit there trying to fathom that if I was a player under him, how there would be any level of, kind of resilience developed, because it just seemed like he was happy to, cop the result. And then obviously, something did start to work for the players who were in the circle. And I remember being quite disappointed when he left, to be honest with you. But it was something that does stand out to me, thinking about how he was versus how he actually ended up being as a manager.
Yeah, you know what? I'd completely forgotten until you said that, but I remember now the absolute piss that got taken out of him, because I think he said things like, I was really impressed with our warm-up, like he'd go on about how preparation for the game and how that we looked great in the warm-up, and everyone's like, we've just lost the game and you're going to focus on the I'd completely forgotten that until you said that. That was quite funny. We will now look at the players that we signed that season, because as you say, as much as it was one of those, I guess, middle of the road seasons, it was interesting to see some of the players brought in and how long some of those players did actually stick with us. I guess primarily the three on screen, you could say. I mean, all defenders, Reece Burke, Geordie Device, and Eric Lehigh joining the club in that window. George Long also joined, I think, on a free transfer from Sheffield United. Nigel Adkins, former club, that window as well. All four of those players really playing quite a key part in City for, Lehigh less so, because I think he left the end of the following season. But Burke, Device, George Long as well, all playing for us through this season, the following season, and then in League One in what ended up being a title-winning season. So it was interesting sort of seeing, I guess we're sort of at this point now of the 2010s where we've kind of swept out all of the Premier League players, all of the Steve Bruce players, and we're now fully into this next era of signings. But I guess some substantial City players, coming into the building in this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was interesting actually at the weekend, because George Long was in goal for Norwich.
I'd completely missed it even gone there.
Yep. And then when I heard George Long is coming on, I was like, oh, George Long, that's right. And such is how memorable this season was. I guess it's also worth noting, Reece Burke secured a Premier League move as well in the later stage, which I thought was, we always thought Reece Burke was quite a decent kind of signing, or had the right attributes, but wanted to see how he developed. And I think this season, in hindsight, was probably the one where we realized that he was kind of decent, because largely Geordie Device was that player that was kind of like, if he was playing, you felt some level of security at the back. But I do remember he had some injury woes, and so when Device wasn't playing, there was a lot of concern about how it would actually hold up.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because I'm looking at the players we brought in on loan. Todd Kane from Chelsea, I thought, my memory of him is that he actually wasn't too bad. Like, I thought he had a pretty reasonable spell. He was one of those players that when we went on that big winning run, I feel like really sort of stepped up. He chipped in with the 3 goals as well, so I feel like he had a reasonable spell. But Tommy Elphick's one, whose name had completely gone out of my mind as a City player until I started to think about this episode. And he's one of those ones where because I think we only ended up having him for half the season, where, I think if we'd been able to or had that financial ambition, we would have tried to push to sign him permanently. And I think he was on loan, I want to say he was on loan from Bournemouth, and then he went to Villa, or he was on loan from Villa and then went to Bournemouth. I think it was one or the other. But I remember, yes, he was from Villa, so he must have gone to Bournemouth. But he seemed to have quite an underrated spell for us as well. But Chris Martin probably less so. I remember he came in on deadline day, and we were a bit excited to finally get a high caliber championship striker, and I think he might have scored 1 goal with us, and just sort of joins that list of underwhelming striker signings that we've made over the years.
I'd like to call that the Danny Graham list, if I'm able to, because I feel like he's the carbon copy, and what was very much made of Martin's time at the club was the role that he played in the build up to. It's like, oh yeah, but he does a lot of work off the ball, and that was kind of the excuse for his let's just say large amounts of underperformance that plagued him. So yeah, I think the Danny Graham list is probably the best way to describe his spell.
Yeah, Chris Chris Badea of the current day players is one who's sort of teetering on the edge of that list. Like he's got the goals in back-to-back games now, so you think, oh, maybe he's pulling himself away from that. But he definitely fits in that category of, tries hard, runs around, makes a nuisance of himself, but needs a few more goals to get going, I think, to really sort of pull away from that. But yeah, Chris Martin's certainly on that list. Then in terms of departures, losing, sort of as I said, the last of those Premier League players, particularly the ones on screen here in David Myler, Alan McGregor, and Michael Dawson. Hernandez, another one who also left after not being able to agree on a new deal. I mean, I think we sort of paid lip service to the supporters by saying we offered Hernandez a new deal, which he didn't take, but I suspect it was much more of here's a very sort of lowball offer just to sort of claim that we've tried to keep you when they didn't really have that intention. But, some big names leaving the club. I think really it was only Marshall in goal was probably the only one still remaining after this point who was really a big player for us at any point in the Premier League. So really a changing of the guard with these guys.
Yeah, and I was also going to say, just on that, like, is there anything more strange than City having David Marshall and Alan McGregor both on the books at the same time?
Yeah,
with the international keeper and backup keeper also club teammates. I find that remarkable as far as the statistic goes,
particularly in the championship. Yeah.
Particularly in the championship. So I think that's, when I saw Greg's like face pop up, I was just like, that's right. We did have them both on the books at the same time, which is remarkable. But I guess from when I see this image as well, like I said, the fond memories, Dawson and Myler were absolute, crowd favorites. And, we kind of rode some really exciting, and depressing times with them as fans, and certainly McGregor as well. I still have my own reservations of whether McGregor should have been in the FA Cup final or not. But look, it certainly was an interesting period to see so many of those mainstay kind of core players depart.
Yeah, and Odebajo left and joined Brentford. I'd actually completely forgotten he went to Brentford and played a decent amount of games for them. I knew that he'd gone to Sheff Wednesday at some point, but for some reason in my head I thought he'd gone straight there. And unfortunately, another one of those players who injury sort of cruelled a really promising young career, which was a real shame for him. I guess finishing off just with that context of the first half of that season, we sort of already talked about a few of the key games in that one. From a Cup's point of view, sort of looking back on the League Cup, a pretty memorable Cup run. I think we beat Sheff United on penalties. Funnily enough, Billy Sharp scored in that game. I was looking up who the goal scorers in that game were. So funny to see Billy Sharp's name pop up there. And then, of course, lost to Derby 4-0 in the second round. And I say, of course, because I just feel like, for whatever reason, Derby seemed to be one of those bogey teams for us where, no matter what sort of form they're in, even when they're, in administration and going down to League One, they seem to pop up and beat us 3 or 4-0, which is always frustrating. So nothing really to talk about from the League Cup perspective. And then, as we sort of already talked about a few of these games, I mean, the big win was that one against Leeds. And then, Campbell doing pretty well for us against Brentford as well. And Jackson Irvine, having a reasonably prolific spell for us as well in that first half. And I'm wearing a Jackson Irvine shirt, which, I hadn't bought shirts for a couple of seasons, and having an Australian on the books and scoring reasonably well for us as well was a nice motivation to go out and get some City attire. But, you touched on it at the start. I guess that four-game winning run to finish off the calendar year was a real sort of, I mean, we hadn't really experienced that for a few seasons as City supporters. It was a real tough going for a while, and we really started to turn a corner that season.
Yeah, absolutely. And then obviously it continued with the 6-0 win against Bolton, and then we beat Sheff Wednesday the week after. So like it was 6 victories in a row. Which of course is going to have anyone believing. But if you go through and kind of scroll through the entire set of fixtures for the year, outside of that patch, it's pretty grim viewing. So the fact that we finished mid-table obviously reflects how mediocre the season was, but it's just a huge breath of life that able to string together that many quality performances.
But it's also remarkable, as you say, I mean, highlighting the Christmas period, because up until week 19, which I think is the last game of November, we were in the relegation zone. So that's, well, like game night. So that's almost literally half a season. 23 games is half the season in the championship, but 19 games to still be in the relegation zone, to then finish as close as we did to the playoffs. I mean, granted, we finished the season in 13th, but we did get up to, I think, 8th was our highest position. Remarkable turnaround of form to be able to do that. And to have such a, sort of, I don't know, everything just clicked into place, once we hit December. I guess maybe a bit of confidence. I can't think off the top of my head, maybe Bowen just sort of getting going. Nothing really stands out as anything that would have kind of changed that form, other than, a bit of confidence, maybe personnel, and everything just clicking. So it's an interesting season in that sense to look back on, because of just how poorly we started, to where we sort of, I guess, particularly as we're looking back on the first half of the season, where we ended that first half with that win over Leeds, where I guess it highlights that even if you don't have a particularly strong overall season, if you can at least provide some highlights like that win over Leeds, like the goal scoring exploits of Bowen, it can still end up being quite a fun season to reflect on.
Yeah, and also I guess the added frustration that we think about where we kind of sit at the moment, and I know that the current rebuild has been a little bit frustrating for us as fans, especially given the optimism around the place, last season. But the fact that this January, window was certainly a time period where there wasn't really any investment and support, because we were still obviously sitting under the alums. How frustrating that would have been for the playing group, perhaps after showing that amount of fight, and to be able to put themselves back in the picture, and then to not really have any, any exciting kind of reinforcement appear. It does point to, we certainly do, although things might be frustrating, we're operating under far greener pastures these days than, we were.
Yeah, Liam bloody Ridgewell, hey. But look, we'll talk more about that half of the season next time around. So thank you for joining me for this one, Logan.
Yeah, my pleasure, Alex. Good to be here.
No worries. And thanks everyone for listening in. We will be back next week, back with our regular programming to talk all things City from the current season. But we're going to keep working our way through this 2010s look back with 3 episodes to go. So until next time, come on, City.